Ever get this feeling like intellectual trends are kind of like going in and out of style? Take Marxism, for instance. It's everywhere, had a huge impact, but you look around and it's not as popular as it used to be, even with academics, even the left-leaning ones. So that's our deep dive today, figuring out why that is. We've got a whole stack of sources here, articles, economic texts, the whole shebang, and we are going to break it down.
It's really a fascinating case, isn't it? And just to be clear, we're not here to argue is Marxism right or wrong, but to get why it's lost its appeal in certain circles.
Exactly. So, like, where do we even start with this?
Well, a lot of our sources, they point to some pretty major critiques of what they call scientific Marxism, basically the whole Marx's ideas are objective scientific laws thing. And these critiques really take aim at that foundation.
Okay, hit me with them. What's the first crack in this foundation then?
First one, it all centers on this thing called the labor theory of value. Basically, it's this idea that the value of something depends on how much labor went into making it. This was big in classical economics, and Marx was all about it. But then came neoclassical economics, and they're all about supply and demand.
So, like, say you got this amazing artisan, right? Spends weeks on this beautiful table, hand-carved, the whole 9 yards. Marx would say, all those hours you put in, that's the value.
Yeah.
But then, what if no one's buying hand-carved tables anymore? Suddenly it's supply and demand that matters more, not the work itself.
Exactly. That shift in thinking really threw a wrench into Marx's whole economic framework.
Gotcha. Okay, so what's the next big critique? I need to know more.
This one's about Marx's crisis theory. He thought capitalism was unstable, destined to destroy itself, predicted it would just crumble under its own contradictions.
And, well, it didn't exactly go that way, did it?
Nope, not quite. Sure, capitalism has had its ups and downs, recessions, depressions, the whole financial crisis thing, but it's a survivor, adapted every time.
Like they say, what doesn't kill you
Makes you stronger. You got it. And I think that's the thing. Marx didn't quite see how capitalism would evolve, how it would regulate itself, or the impact of things like globalization and tech. These factors, they've made the system way more resilient than Marx ever imagined.
Okay, that's 2 down. What's number 3 on our list?
Number 3 takes us into historical materialism. Bit of a mouthful, I know. It's this idea that history unfolds in these predictable stages, all driven by economics.
So like a giant game of cause and effect, but economics is the main player.
Yeah, you could say that. But while it's a really interesting theory, people criticize it for being too simplistic, too deterministic. Like, come on, human history, it's messy. Economics matter. But so does culture, politics, even just individual choices.
All right, fair enough. We're on a roll here. What's the 4th critique of Marxist theory then?
This one gets into post-scarcity conditions. See, Marx, he believed that tech would just keep advancing until we had this abundance of everything. No more scarcity, everyone's needs met.
So like Star Trek, everyone's got what they need, living the good life.
In a way, yeah. But let's be real, we haven't exactly reached utopia just yet. And even if we did get to this abundance thing, there's still the issue of status, of people comparing themselves to others.
Ah, I see what you mean. Even if we all had spaceships, someone would still be jealous of the person with the slightly faster, shinier one.
Exactly. It's all about conspicuous consumption, as Thorstein Veblen called it. People buy things to show off, to be better than their neighbor, even when they've got all their basic needs met, creates a kind of artificial scarcity.
It never ends, does it? It's like they say, keeping up with the Joneses. Or in this case, trying to outdo the Jetsons.
You got it. And that whole psychological social element, that's something Marx didn't really account for in his theories.
This is fascinating. Okay, last but not least, hit me with that final critique. What's the final blow to this scientific Marxism?
Right, the grand finale. This one's called the socialist calculation debate. It all comes down to this. Can a centrally planned economy, the kind Marx was thinking about, ever really be as efficient as a market economy? Friedrich Hayek, he argued, no way. He was convinced that markets, as messy as they can be, are just way better at handling information, setting prices, and allocating resources, all that supply and demand stuff.
So Hayek's saying the invisible hand of the market, even with all its flaws, it still does a better job than some central planner could.
You got it in one. Hayek's point was that central planners, they could never have enough information to make the right calls for a whole economy. They wouldn't know the specifics of different situations, what consumers actually want, how things are changing in the market, and that knowledge, it's essential to making good decisions.
So even with the best intentions, trying to plan an entire economy from some government office, that's like trying to conduct an orchestra without even listening to any of the instruments.
Now, that is a great analogy. And that argument really hit home for a lot of people. Economists, policymakers, even those who were sympathetic to socialist ideas, it made them really stop and think.
So we've got these 5 major critiques of Marx's ideas. But I have a feeling there's more to this story, right?
Oh, absolutely, because while all of this was going on, a whole new way of thinking about social justice was emerging, and it was particularly appealing to those who were starting to doubt traditional Marxist theory.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. So we've got these cracks starting to show in scientific Marxism, but it's getting more to it than that. What really changed the game?
Well, that's where our deep dive takes us next, to this really pivotal figure, John Rawls. His book, A Theory of Justice, it wasn't meant to be a direct attack on Marx or anything, but it really shook things up.
Funny how that happens sometimes in the world of ideas. Right. One minute you're just writing your book, the next minute, bam, paradigm shift.
Exactly. And Rawls's ideas, they really resonated with people who were already starting to have second thoughts about traditional Marxism.
So tell me more about this Rawls guy. What made his ideas so different, so appealing, especially compared to Marx?
Well, Rawls, he came in with this whole new way of thinking about social justice. Instead of exploitation, which is what Marx was all about, he put equality front and center.
Right. And how did Marx see exploitation again? It wasn't like this inherently bad thing under capitalism of it.
You got it. For Marx, exploitation was just part of how capitalism worked. Capitalists extract surplus value from workers' labor. It's like a feature of the system, not necessarily some moral failing.
But Rawls took a different angle.
He did. He argued that a truly just society is one where everybody has a fair shot, no matter where they come from, what advantages or disadvantages they're born with.
That's a powerful idea. It just feels right, you know.
It does. And one of the things that makes Rawls so compelling is this thought experiment he came up with called the veil of ignorance. Imagine, he said, you're designing a society from scratch, but you have no idea what position you'll end up in.
So you could be rich, poor, healthy, sick, talented, not so talented. Who knows?
Exactly. Behind this veil of ignorance, Rawls said people would naturally choose to create a society that's fair to everyone, even the least advantaged, because, hey, you might end up being one of them.
Makes sense. Yeah. If you don't know where you'll land, you want to make sure everyone has a decent shot at a good life.
Exactly. And this idea of fairness as impartiality, it really took off. People started to rethink their whole approach to social justice.
So how did this shift from exploitation to equality land with all the Marxists out there?
Well, there's this great story about G.A. Cohen, a really prominent Marxist philosopher. He talked about having this road to Damascus moment where he realized that what really bothered him wasn't just exploitation as Marx defined it, it was the inequality all around him.
So he's looking at the world, he sees poverty, lack of opportunity, and he's like, wait a minute, Marx's definition of exploitation doesn't quite capture the whole picture.
Exactly. And Cohen, he wasn't alone. This shift from exploitation to equality was a huge deal. It really changed the conversation about social justice.
Makes you wonder, though, if Marx's ideas about economics and history, well, if they're not holding up so well these days, what's left of Marxism? So if scientific Marxism, is this whole system of thought, if that's not really holding up, what's left of Marxism these days? One of the sources we look at called it a religion without a theology. Kind of a harsh way to put it, don't you think?
Yeah, it's definitely provocative. And I think it gets at this weird thing about Marx's legacy, right? Like academic circles, they're not really into those core economic theories anymore. But his ideas about power, about class, about how societies are structured, that stuff's still very much alive.
Yeah, you see it everywhere. Social movements, cultural critiques, heck, even just everyday conversations.
Exactly. It's like Marx gave us this whole new way of looking at things, a way of seeing power dynamics, inequalities that maybe weren't so obvious before.
Yeah.
And that analysis of capitalism, right, the way it affects culture, our identities, even individual freedom, that still resonates with a lot of people, even if they wouldn't call themselves Marxists.
It's interesting, though. You mentioned cultural Marxism earlier,
Right.
which is a term that gets thrown around a lot these days.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's used in a different sense than what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Cultural Marxism has kind of gone off on its own. It's become this catch-all phrase for anything people see as too politically correct or like an attack on traditional values. Definitely a whole other deep dive right there. But it just shows how much Marx's ideas have seeped into the culture, even if they've morphed into something he wouldn't recognize.
It really makes you think about how sticky ideas are.
Yeah.
Yeah. How they evolve, how they find new ways to survive, even when the world that created them is long gone. So where does that leave us then? What's the big takeaway from our deep dive into Marxism?
I think it reminds us that ideas aren't these fixed things. They're always being tested, challenged, replaced by something new. Just like we moved on from classical physics to quantum mechanics, our understanding of economics, justice, how societies work, it's always evolving. And so this whole decline of scientific Marxism, this rise of new ways of thinking like Rawls' focus on equality, it's not just about Marx getting it wrong, it's about how we keep searching for answers for better ways to live together in the world.
It's like we've been on this winding journey through history and ideas. And we've ended up at this really interesting crossroads. If Rawls offered a new path for people who weren't feeling Marx anymore, what other paths are out there? What new ideas are waiting to be discovered to help us tackle the challenges of the 21st century?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question for all of us. I think what we've seen from this deep dive is that understanding the past, how ideas take root, why they fade away, it's essential if we want to make sense of the present and build a better future, one that reflects our values and aspirations.